Amanda. She should be able to, I don't know, Catherine, if you want to text and see if she's, oh, looks like she has showed up now again in the waiting room. Do you see that, James?
Yes, there's actually two instances. Okay, one. All right, admitting everybody.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for giving us a few extra minutes there. This is the June 16th Portland Clean Energy Fund Grants Committee meeting, and we're gonna jump right into it and start, as we always do, with some virtual participation kind of check and guidelines. These committee meetings are open to the public. The public is invited to comment around 6:05, be a few minutes later today. If you are a member of the public and you're interested in providing public comment, you can indicate that you want to do that by putting that into the chat box. There's also tonight an opportunity for any members of the public who want to go into a breakout session and just have some conversation with committee members. That's going to happen at there's going to be a break at 7 o'clock until 7:05, and then there's that kind of just an informal conversation space from about 7:05 to, or actually it's going to start at 7 and end at 7:15, but there will be a 5-minute actual break before that. We ask that outside of those two spaces, the public comment and the break where you can have conversation with committee members, that members of the public don't use the raise hand function and just be observers for the public meeting. We would like to invite everyone though. It looks like maybe there's only one or two tonight to introduce themselves in the chat box and give your name. If you have an organizational affiliation that you're interested in sharing, if you have pronouns that you want to share, you can put those in there now. And then after we do committee member and staff introductions, we'll go ahead, Sam will introduce folks from the public who are in attendance, who put their information into the chat. This meeting is being recorded and is also being live streamed on YouTube and is available after the fact to watch a recording on YouTube as well. And closed captioning is also available. You can find the closed captioning by going up to the menu bar in your Zoom and looking over to where you see those 3 little dots. And if you click on that, you'll get the drop-down menu, and then you can find the option for viewing the live transcript. So with that, I think we're gonna, and this is a little bit of a surprise for committee members after the introduction. So I'm just gonna give you a heads up that for the opening tonight, sort of in lieu of having one person provide an opening inspiration, we're going to be asking for volunteers to read parts of our guiding principles, just to kind of anchor us in the purpose of the program before we go into these meetings. And I think we might just see how many minutes that takes, see how it feels, and if it feels good to everyone, just go with that as a way of opening the meetings moving forward. So. But first, we're going to start with introductions, and I want to start with committee members, and I'll go ahead and call on you and ask you to introduce yourself, and we'll start with Robin.
Good evening, Robin Wang, PCEF committee member, he, him.
Ranfis?
Hi, everyone. Ranfis Giantino Villatoro, he, him, committee member.
Michael?
Hi, I hope everybody's having a great Wednesday. I am Michael Eden Hill, he, him, PCEF committee member.
Megan?
Hey everybody, Megan Horst, she, her, PCEF committee member.
Faith?
Hi, so good to be in your company. Welcome back to the sunshine, everybody. Faith Graham, committee member, she, her pronouns.
Shanice?
Greetings, everyone. Shanice Clark, she, her, committee member.
Jeffrey?
Hi, everyone. Jeffrey Moreland, he, him, committee member.
Amanda?
Hi, everyone. Amanda Squempignazi, she, her, committee member.
Thanks, Amanda. And Maria Sippen is our other committee member who is not able to make tonight's meeting. So I'm going to move now to introducing PCEF staff who have a role in tonight's agenda. And I will start with myself. I'm Katie Lister, PCEF staff. I use she, her pronouns, and then pass it to James.
Everybody, good to see you today. My name is James Valdez. I use he, him pronouns and am part of PCEF staff and also serving as the tech lead. If you have any technical Zoom issues, feel free to send me a chat and I'll try to help you out.
And Janet?
Good evening, everyone. As always, it is great to be with you. Janet Hammer, she, her pronouns. Sorry, was that?
Hey, Joy, how are you today?
Oh, I think.
Oh, Chris, we can hear you. Okay, go ahead, Janet.
Janet Hammer, she, her pronouns, and PCEF staff.
Okay, and I'm going to hand it over to Sam, but for folks who joined late, who are members of the public, if you want to put your introduction into the chat, your name, if you have organizational affiliation or pronouns that you want to share, put those in there as well. We do have two members of the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability staff who are going to be presenting pretty shortly. So Sam, I don't know if you want to introduce them now or introduce them at the time, but I'm going to pass it to you.
We'll start now and then turn it over again too. So I'll send it to Andrea Pastor, our Senior Economic Planner, as well as Catherine Hardinger next, our City Planner, to introduce themselves briefly. So I'll just turn to both of you all first and then I'll go to the list.
Hi, everyone. Andrea Pastor, she, her pronouns. As Sam mentioned, I'm an economic planner with the Anti-Displacement Action Plan team and generally housing and economic policy work. Catherine?
Hi, Catherine Hartinger, she, her pronouns, Anti-Displacement Action Team with Andrea and a colleague, Dwight Jefferson, who's not here this evening.
Nope, he is.
Oh, is he? He's here. Okay. He's not presenting, but he is here. He's the third member of our team. So thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Dwight, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself since we point?
Sure, I'm over here. My name is Dwight Jefferson. I'm a planner on the Anti-Displacement Action Plan team at BPS. I work mainly in housing planning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dwight.
All right.
Sam?
Thank you all for being our guests. Thank you. My name is Sam Barraza. I'm with the PCEF staff. I use he and him pronouns. And it's good to be here with you all. And we've got just a handful of other folks with us here tonight. And apologies if I mispronounce your name. We've got Chris Sobrato here, she, her, with our Village Gardens. We've got David Granfield from the PCEF team, as well as Diane Henkel, she, her, for Small Business Utility Advocates. And if I missed anyone else, please just chime in the chat box and we'll get to you.
All right, thank you. So now, like I mentioned, I'm going to ask for some committee member volunteers I think we need 4 folks to take a turn reading different parts of the guiding principles. So who wants to take the first one?
I could start.
Thanks, Shanice.
So focused on climate action with multiple benefits. Invest in people, livelihoods, places, and processes that build climate resilience and community wealth, foster healthy communities, and support regenerative systems. avoid and mitigate displacement, especially resulting from gentrification pressures.
Thank you. Okay.
Justice-driven. Advance systems change that addresses historic and current discrimination. Center all disadvantaged and marginalized groups, particularly Black and Indigenous people.
I'll do community powered. Trust community knowledge, experience, innovation, and leadership, honor and build on existing work and partnerships while supporting capacity building for emerging community groups and diverse coalitions. Engage with and invest in community-driven approaches that foster community power to create meaningful change.
Accountable. Implement transparent funding, oversight, and engagement processes that promote continuous learning, programmatic checks and balances, and improvement. Demonstrate achievement of equitable social, economic, and environmental benefit. Remain accountable to target beneficiaries, grantees, and all Portlanders.
Thank you all. I didn't see anyone signed up for public comment, but I just wanted to mention it again, just in case anyone came into the meeting late. If you are a member of the public and you want to provide public comment, just go ahead and indicate that desire in the chat box. So just a quick run through of the agenda. We're not quite on time, but we'll get back there or somewhere. The first presentation and the bulk of the beginning of the meeting is we have our colleagues from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability here to have a conversation with the committee about anti-displacement and community stability. Then moving into a break and community conversation, revisiting the threshold review. Sam will be talking some about the city audit of the program and the audit response, and then closing out the meeting. So I didn't see anyone else pop into the chat indicating that they wanted to provide public comment. But before we move on, I know that we said that we were going to send the minutes from June 2nd sooner than the day before the meeting, and we did not. But I wanted to ask if you all had had a chance to read the minutes from the May 19th meeting, and if there were any comments or edits or changes to those minutes. Getting a thumbs up. Okay. All right. Then we will call those minutes adopted, and we'll revisit the minutes from June 2nd at our July meeting. So I'm going to hand it over to Sam just to do a quick check on timeline, and then he'll move it on to the conversation about anti-displacement.
Cool. Thank you, Katie. And I think we're just going to keep bringing this up so that we kind of give folks a realm of what we're moving through as we have each of these conversations these weeks. But as you all know, last meeting we talked about the minimum scores, and then as well as the innovation and other funding category. We didn't quite get into the threshold review, so we're picking that up this week. So that's what got pushed down to this week. This week we're talking about anti-displacement, threshold review, audit response, and as part of that, we're going to just touch at the very end about workforce development and contractor support grants. But that's something that did get pushed off of this agenda. That got pushed off to next week, or not next week, but a few weeks from now, July 7th. So you'll have a little bit of a breather before we come back to you all. Where we'll talk about land building acquisition, so some of the boundary sideboards that we want you all to be thinking about there, the workforce development contractor support grants, and how you want to think about allocations or other things that you want to think about based on what we learned in the first round of funding, as well as come back to the conversation on the grant caps. July 21st will be in a good place to come back to you all with all our evaluation findings from round one, as well as some of the community conversations that have resulted as part of some of the evaluation findings, talk about those recommended improvements, and then bring this all together and look at the first draft of the next RFP. So bring all your feedback together with the expectation we come back in August on August 4th, and after taking some of your feedback, making adjustments, bring you all to decision point before we push those out for public comment. We'll be out for public comment in August, potentially have a public listening session on August 18th, and then bring all that back to you all to make adjustments on their September 1st meeting, and ideally push the RFP out on September 22nd. So those are the conversations we're starting to have with folks as we're connecting with grantees, folks that are having conversations around planning grants. We're starting to signal that end of September is when they're going to see the next round of applications. So just give you keep grounding this in this timeline, and I will share that we're also September 15th. We've made tentative plans and booked our first in-person meeting date in September to happen over at Rossi Farms. So we're working that out and working on the logistics of that as well. But that's just grounding you all back in the timeline, and please let's just reach back out to us if you have questions about any of these pieces or other things you want to see there. Please know whether it's your co-chairs Michael and Maria or myself and Katie. So with that, let's head off to the next slide. I'm gonna just do a little pass off. This conversation, it's a conversation that there's been a lot of interest in, and it started with a lot of the work that we did last year on the draft RFP, the draft request for proposals that you all pulled together. And we acknowledged we wanted to do some more work, come back to the conversation in a fuller way, particularly as we went out with a larger pool of funds. And so as we started to do that, as we started to have internal conversations with our city staff and our city experts working on this, we realized that it'd be really appropriate at this point to bring this conversation to you all. So I think you've got a great presentation in front of you all and great folks to chat about that. So we've got Andrea Pastor, our senior economic planner, and Catherine Hardinger, our city planner, to chat about this. So without further ado, I'll just turn this over to them for them to run the show. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Sam. You can hit the next slide, Katie. So again, Catherine Hartinger, I'm here with Andrea Pastor and Dwight Jefferson. And so tonight we've had a couple meetings with James and Sam and Katie to kind of try and tailor this presentation a little bit to this group. We may not hit it quite right on the head, so feel free to ask questions throughout. So I'm going to speak a little bit about our current policy framework and analytical tools. And then Andrea is going to speak on some research on green investment impacts and social diversity investment metric, which is something that we're working on now. And again, at the end, feel free to ask questions about anything we talked about. Feel free to ask questions about anything we didn't talk about. And just to say up front, there's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot that we're still figuring out, which I think is why it's so great to have conversations like this, so that we can kind of figure it out together. And we are working very closely with the Anti-Displacement Coalition and having a lot of these conversations with them as well. Okay, so to kick it off, do you want to slide? So I believe that we put out what we call the foundation report back in April. And I believe a copy of that was sent out to committee members. I can make sure to put a link in the chat as well. But this document kind of lays out the city's current approach to anti-displacement and equitable development work, and also kind of lays a path forward on where we think we need to go to do better. So I'm going to touch on a little bit of that, not all of it. There is more in that report. So the city, starting with the policy framework, the city actually has a pretty strong policy framework for anti-displacement and equitable development work. It's also important to note that the strength of this framework is the result of community advocacy. Back in 2015, a group of community-based organizations came together to form the Anti-Displacement PDX Coalition, otherwise known as the ADPDX Coalition. They pushed for 11 different priorities that translated into roughly 30 different policies being included in the adopted comprehensive plan. So some of those are here, so related to community empowerment, environmental justice. And then this last one, I think, is what we're really here to talk about tonight. The comp plan directs staff to analyze impacts, advance equity, and mitigate harm. So this is, looking at benefits and burden, but also trying to predict what impacts what we're doing is going to have in the community and figure out how to stop that from happening, or at the very least mitigate for it. Slide. We have a number of analysis tools that we use to help us figure some of this stuff out. So there's some general equity analysis tools, equity lenses, power, mapping power, looking at benefits burdens. There's some budget tools. But the main thing we use are a series of maps. And so there's, opportunity maps, which is kind of what you see on this slide. And this is really a way to map out where areas of the city are that are very amenity rich. So kind of things like proximity to grocery stores, parks, frequent transit. So areas that are brighter are considered to be higher opportunity areas. And we also have a set of maps. There's a displacement risk tool, but there's also a more general vulnerability map, which I'll talk about on the next slide. And we use these maps independently, but we also use them together to create this equitable investment matrix, which I will also talk about in another slide. So more to come on that slide. So the vulnerability index looks at 4 factors. And one of the things we're trying to do through our work is that different city bureaus have slightly different ways of measuring vulnerability. So this is part of the challenge, is that we're all looking at things a little bit differently. And so part of what Andrea and Dwight and I are working on is to kind of align the bureaus. So we're looking at things the same way. So the version that BPS uses looks at 4 factors. Areas with a higher percentage of people of color, renters, low income, and less educational attainment. So those are the 4 factors. And as you can see by looking at the map, areas in East Portland kind of light up as higher vulnerability. Areas close in Northeast are less vulnerable, et cetera. Slide. So this is what we call the equitable investment matrix. And so I'm not going to go into too much detail here. This is a tool that we have that we don't use super consistently, to be honest. But I think the main point here is that when we look at vulnerability and opportunity together, we can begin to kind of start to sort out the different neighborhoods across the city. And the main point here is that there's a geographic component to the impact of our investment. So the same investment in 2 different neighborhoods is going to have different impacts. And so really, I think that, which I think is important to some of the PCEF grants, and it's just that geography is a factor, and this is a way for us to start thinking about what that means in terms of impact. Okay, slide. And this is really kind of at a high level what we're shooting for with this project. Historically, the city's kind of investment approach has been to, invest in a place and then mitigate for the impacts on people. And I think we're trying to flip that on its head here by saying, start with a BIPOC-led community vision, invest in the people, and then invest in the place and leverage that, again, to support the people. And so that's really what we're shooting for here. And this is also, and Andrea is going to speak more to this, but I think this is also why we are not super concerned about some of the PCEF investments, because in many ways, you're already following this model. So just want to point that out. And then I think Andrea is going to take it from here. So slide, Katie.
Yeah, next slide. Thanks. All right. So as Catherine mentioned, we know we have to do things differently. And we've been thinking about it mostly in terms of like large, significant infrastructure projects like light rail and other big investments the city makes. But we have been getting consistently been getting questions about predicting likely displacement impacts for smaller projects. And people want to know what types and sizes of investments are likely to trigger displacement in the private market. But predicting that is really far from a perfect science. And attempting like economic analysis for all the different kinds of investments that the city makes is just impractical and not really feasible. So for this reason, we're working on creating a framework for how we as a city government think about the likely impacts of particular project types based on existing research. So for this presentation, I just kind of, tried to take a quick scan of existing research that is out there that might be relevant to what the committee is looking at, but it's definitely not a comprehensive look at all of the things that are out there. I'm sure many of you are much more well-versed in that than I am. But a lot of the studies that I found were also, I wanted to point out, they were based on case studies, which are hard to generalize across cities, or they're looking, kind of like a post hoc analysis at real estate price changes after an investment, but they may or may not be controlling for all of the factors that might have been going on. So again, it's like really difficult to draw strong conclusions from existing economic research. Though we are working on doing our own analysis, also that's more quantitative. It's still also just in its very early phases at this point. But that being said, there is some evidence that there is like what economists would call like a modest increase in people's willingness to pay for properties with good green infrastructure, proximity to community gardens, street trees for sure, and some of the other types of investments that PCEF funding will likely be used for. So we wanted to kind of highlight some of that. Next slide, please. So these, I just decided to kind of pick 3 papers that I thought might be of interest to folks to take a look at. But some quick takeaways from these were really bolster our impression that following PCEF's stated goals and priorities for funding decisions, it's likely that projects will be more likely to build resilience to displacement rather than increase the risk. That being said, this first paper it kind of talks about the connection between social vulnerability and green gentrification, which is the term that, if people haven't heard it yet, it's the idea that investments in climate resiliency and other sorts of green investments could lead to gentrification. It points out that, as we know, people who are vulnerable to displacement are also likely the communities that will also bear the brunt of climate change impacts. So it's talking about how neighborhoods with great green resilience infrastructure, especially in areas that are at potentially high risk for climate impacts, for example, like areas with bioswales and green roofs and areas that experience frequent flooding, they might end up being, seeing gentrification, if only because they have those benefits already built in. So that was the first one. Some of the solutions that the authors suggest are really pairing green infrastructure projects for climate adaptation needs, along with funding that'll ensure the protection of affordable housing through preservation and development, or to reduce the cost of housing for folks, for example, with weatherization projects that lower utility bills. But most importantly, the authors stress that investments in green infrastructure should also build the adaptive capacity of vulnerable residents to both climate impact and displacement. And they actually point at some Portland-based projects as good models where local residents are trained, to do the work that improves social and environmental resilience while they're getting like job skills and doing things that will improve their economic opportunity, which I thought was very relevant for PCEF. The second article gives further examples about how climate actions can be structured to contribute many other benefits, like, improving health and well-being, increasing economic prosperity, and strengthening institutions and governance, which also, of course, supports the ideas behind PCEF's stated goals and structure. And the third article is a case study that looks at some properties in Brooklyn that were, close to community gardens, and those properties did end up seeing significant increases in per capita income over the 5-year study period. And that's kind of like a marker of gentrification that these studies authors use. But again, so looking at this as an example of like where these community gardens might have, potentially triggered some sort of gentrification, even the studies authors say, like, obviously the existence of community gardens is not the only factor that spurs on gentrification. Often it's a combination of community-led improvement initiatives, but also governmental policies such as rezoning areas to, quote, like the highest and best use, tax incentives for adaptive reuse of derelict or abandoned buildings, private investment dollars looking for a place to land. Certainly making the community more attractive and greener does help encourage the trend, but they also cited works that actually talked about what the purpose and the intent behind community type projects would be. And I thought this would be really relevant, since you get to read really thorough explanations of what those purposes are. And they looked at, the distinction between, for example, a garden project that is a means of community resistance and empowerment versus those that are done for more like beautification or like, relaxation, and thinking about the difference between those and how one is an active opposition to, the kind of the movements that lead towards gentrification and displacement, whereas the other is actually more likely to sort of welcome it in because it might be about like improving the look of the neighborhood, and that actually will be likely to then, encourage higher property values. Next. So what we're doing is we're kind of doing these compilations of existing research, and we're looking at them for a variety of different kinds of projects. The blue column reflects kind of an overall synthesis of the research that we're looking at into, these different kinds of investments. And you see like, for example, this is kind of green investments. So at the top, you see like large investments like iconic parks and greenways that pass through a lot of neighborhoods. And those have evidence of large increases in adjacent property values. And then you work your way toward the bottom towards much more modest investments. And this is, we're doing this work with PBOT and parks to kind of look at the existing research across a wide variety of these types of things. And next, and that is feeding into the next slide is this framework that is being developed in conjunction with PBOT called the Social Diversity Investments Metric, which, wanted to look beyond just the strictly market-based data because of the limitations of the research that I said, exist. We're looking to kind of build this framework for thinking through the likely impacts on a more qualitative and holistic method. And I definitely want to stress that this is in a very early stage of thinking. So we're very, very happy to hear feedback, see if this works for any of, you as you're thinking through grants. We would love to hear, what does and what doesn't work. There are some questions at the end that we're hoping will be some, helpful to some degree. So next slide. So first, I'll just start with the theoretical assumptions behind the social diversity investments metric. It's based on two different assumptions. The first is this bond bridge theory, that is that every neighborhood has functions, features, and places that either bond them together and like build resiliency, or bridges them to other neighborhoods and areas, which introduces change and growth. And this theory is based on research out of the University of Cambridge that illustrates neighborhoods have functions, features, and places that might compel other people to travel from outside of the neighborhood and into to kind of take part in that local resource. Those areas that have those features were more likely to gentrify and potentially create displacement when they also had high vulnerability. So this study uses the term social diversity, and they apply it to the places themselves. So the social diversity investment metric is designed to minimize the social diversity of places, functions, and features that we invest in temporarily in neighborhoods that are vulnerable, like to market shifts, while we work to increase the number of resources that help that low-income community thrive in place. The second theory is this city systems theory, which is that every public investment is either remedial, which builds resiliency, and it's it's building on something that exists and is generally fairly small, or transformational. It introduces change and growth. By thinking about potential investments across these two scales, we're hoping to be able to identify the sorts of projects that build resiliency in vulnerable neighborhoods before attracting outsiders to those places. So next slide. Just with this very simple framework, we started thinking about, how this might lead us to prioritize certain projects that were low impact investments, but that would lead to advances in equity, increase of access to local resources, of health, wealth, and education, maybe go very intentionally and slow to medium impact investments that might have some of the same qualities of the low impact investments, but also introduce change and growth. And then potentially delay until stabilize any of those high impact investments that introduce really rapid change or growth for citywide purposes. So, obviously when we're talking about PBOT, these are big, massive investments that they're potentially making. And the bond bridge theory kind of works because, it was based in like this transportation framework. But I think it actually has a lot of applications for different kinds of projects, which is hopefully useful. Is there a question?
Andrea, yeah, I wanted to pause and just make sure that see if there were any questions or clarifications needed at this point. It's a lot of really good information, but I just wanted to, before we move on. Robin?
Totally.
Yeah. Hi, Andrea. Can you give examples of these?
Yes.
And if possible, PCEF kind of examples.
So that'll be harder for me because I didn't look through all of your grant applications, but some of the things that, for example, with parks, we were talking about, a bonding project might be like a small, like concentrating on small neighborhood scale parks and amenities that, will be used by a small number of people, like, in the generally close in geographic area, as opposed to drawing people from outside the neighborhood. So like maybe not like the most state-of-the-art community center in the middle of a really vulnerable neighborhood, because then what you're doing is you're making that neighborhood suddenly much more interesting, appealing, and attractive to people who might have greater resources, and potentially making that, a choice that they might not have otherwise decided to consider as a place to, suddenly move into. So these are sorts of things that, like with PBOT, we're looking at anything that connects people to each other within a neighborhood. So sidewalk infill projects, or like small safety projects that improve like bike connections to local neighborhood serving things or schools, but maybe not thinking about that big greenway bike, advanced bike facility that like brings people from across the city through your neighborhood. And, thinking about those kinds of things. So it could still be active transportation, which, is all very positive, but there are studies that show that certain types of projects that bring people through neighborhoods and kind of introduce outsiders into these neighborhoods may lead to more gentrification and displacement in the long run. Does that kind of get at your question?
Any other questions before Andrea moves on?
And we can go to the next slide. It sort of gets to that with PBOT projects. Since we started with them, they're the ones that have done the most thinking about it. So with those, those two scales, they basically get into, sorting projects into this remedial to transformational and bonding and bridging framework. And it really is just about like trying to think through and see like, is this likely to, does it function on an existing, something that already exists in the area, or is it introducing something new? Actually, if you go to the next slide, the main questions that it asks are on that one. And it's, does it create new infrastructure or resources, or significantly change the current use of existing infrastructure? Will this investment primarily be used by a small group of people within the neighborhood? Does it attract broad user attention? Does it connect people to a regional system? Will people want to travel from outside of the city, from other parts of the city, to access this specific investment? And then whether or not it advances equity, which is kind of like gets at that question of like, what is the purpose behind this at the end of the day? That really does make a big difference. And at least, the research seems to show that like that actually does have a large, impact on like, what are the intents behind it? And so these are just some questions that we're beginning to think through about how we're thinking about city investments overall, and maybe they will be helpful to you. And I'm not entirely sure, but again, like I said, this is all very early stages. Like Sam asked us to think about, talking to you all about this work, and we are very much just grappling with it at the beginning phases. So you are seeing something that we actually have not shown very many folks, even within the city.
And if I can just jump in for 1 second, Andrea, I think this is complicated and it's a lot. And I think that's intentional in some ways. I think when we were first starting on this work a year and a half ago, we would have other bureaus come to us and be like, give us a dollar amount. Like above that dollar amount, we've got to think about displacement. Below that dollar amount, we don't. And that was kind of the common thinking around how to think about investments. And I think what we're coming to is like, that's not it. Like that's part of it, but it's also, you know, where is the investment? Who is there? What is the type? What is the intent? It's all these other factors that we need to be thinking about. It's not a simple dollar amount. And so I think we're in the process of sorting through some of that complication. And to Andrea's point, we're not quite there yet. And I think, you know, it's great to share this with others to help us do that. Sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
No, not at all. This is the last slide, so if people have questions, by all means.
Oh, Robin, I see Robin's hand up.
Yeah, so this is a question maybe more for Katie and Sam, and you might ask us to answer this question, but how do we reflect these considerations into the PCEF criteria?
You know, what I'll share is where we started and where we thought we were going to get to, and maybe a little bit of where I think there's room to still learn and see what's going to come through. You know, originally, I think we started with asking questions in the application process around displacement. And there's a lot of feedback that we just heard that it's a complicated thing to ask nonprofits to respond to. And so we pulled back from that. I know we thought we'd come back, and similar to, I think, what Catherine and Andrew are sharing, we said, is there going to be a map and a dollar threshold at which we have to, you know, then, you know, require a project to think about it? And I think what we're coming to, and I think in conversations that we've had, is that certainly a lot of the projects that we're going to be, the criteria and the things that we're prioritizing, you know, the advancing health, wealth, education, other those things tend to be promoting community stability, and actually in and of itself, those projects are anti-displacement projects. So many of them, if not say so far, about pretty much every project we've invested in are in and of themselves anti-displacement projects. Yet there's still a threshold, and it's this cumulative projects, and what we need to sort of tease out as we go out with larger funds. What are we seeing when we're seeing many projects at a larger scale happen across the city or functioning in one particular geography, and seeing is there trends that we need to be able to manage and think about from a broader portfolio perspective or something else. So I think the sense that we walked away from the conversations is that there's probably majority of the projects are going to be anti-displacement projects in and of themselves because of the priorities, the things that you all elevated in your scoring criteria. But then there may be a place also where if a place is vulnerable to displacement, we may want to steer resources to a particular geography because it's vulnerable, and you want to reinforce or support community stability through those PCEF projects in a particular geography. So I think that these are some of the conversations, and that a lot of the frameworks you all have already built up are supporting community stability, but I think that there's still quite a bit to learn. So that was a lot there, but I think this is some of what I'm starting to walk away from. And Katie, please chime in. And I know I see Francis, I see your hand. So
I don't really have anything to add. I think Sam, I think you covered it. Francis?
Thank you.
I appreciate the presentation. I appreciate this conversation and just the outstanding questions that I think are before us. You know, I think I hate for us to be like in the scenario of like, you know, of course, folks want to see their communities improved. I think the long-standing question has long been, how do we improve communities, our geography, our communities, without displacing the very much taxpayers who are investing in that infrastructure? And how do we ensure that those taxpayer dollars are working for the benefit of those people and not working to displace people? So, you know, I think, you know, my question doesn't necessarily have to be answered now, but I really do wonder, where are all the other bureaus in implementing all these key displacement policies? So that's one question, because I think if our piece is to try to do these investments, but these other bureaus are not doing this, I mean, it would be great to know just where folks are, just inform the committee as we're progressing on investing in work that might relate to you know, regenerative agriculture, landscaping, housing, energy efficiency, like it would be good to know where all the other bureaus are on this. And then I think the second piece, which I think was highlighted earlier as a goal or outcome on this displacement strategy, is leveraging private investment. So where are banks and private investment involvement or engagement in this anti-displacement, strategy? Has there been engagement there? Just kind of curious, because I feel like PCEF is kind of in the middle of this, where we're investing, but we're likely investing in projects that are getting private investments. Are those private investments also doing the legwork on advancing equity? And I think for me, is an outstanding question, like how is PCEF, are we really thinking strategically around PCEF to leverage change in both at the city level, but even at the private level for banks? Maybe that's a really big question, but just kind of curious about just where bureau's at and where are those financial institutions at?
I can jump
Catherine
in.
or Andrea, did you want to speak to that?
Sure, I can speak to it. So we work with a number of other bureaus right now. We have a core team that is us, the Office of Equity and Human Rights, Transportation, Housing, and Prosper Portland. And in the very beginning of the project, we were also working with environmental services and parks and water. And I think we're starting to reach back out to them again. So we are working together internally. I think as I kind of, I'll give you the full backstory. So coming at the kickoff of this project, the big thrust of it was about putting together an anti-displacement task force, a community-led anti-displacement task force. This was pre-COVID. So we were partnering with the Anti-Displacement Coalition, and we really kind of jumped in there and started working on a charter and negotiations with the coalition, negotiations with other bureaus. And so that went on for quite some time, and COVID hit and everything kind of shifted. And we realized kind of the end of last year, we heard from bureau partners that, hey, we are completely spent on COVID response. Even if you came up with something for us to do, we can't pay for it. And so they were just like, can we just hit pause on the task force for a little bit? And so, and we were hearing similar things from the community groups that like they were dealing with food boxes and evictions, and like this was just not, the timing was not right. So we hit pause on that piece. But that task force would have brought community, city leadership, and staff together at one table to hash a lot of this out together, because right now we are kind of working in silos. And so with that on pause, our team is, there's a component with the community looking at specific things BPS can do. But then there's this other issue around alignment around our analytic tools and our investment framework. And part of that, the analytic tools is so we're looking at things the same way and understanding things the same way. The investment framework is that we all look at that differently. And so when we're working in a geography where housing's doing something and transportation is doing something and Prosper is doing something, we have absolutely no way to talk to each other in a way that's meaningful. And so we kind of get together on like project specific things, and they'll put it together a little team. But citywide, we don't coordinate well at all. I mean, I think we just need to own that. And so I think a lot of the work we're doing right now is to get us back to that task force place. I think we realized there was a lot of homework we needed to do because we weren't ready to implement anything. And so that's kind of what we're working on right now, with the goal of getting back to that task force idea, which is really what the community wanted. I can't speak as much to your other side of your question. I think as we move on, we'll be reaching out to CDCs and banks directly. I think we hear a lot that there's nothing you guys can do. The private market is kind of a gorilla in the room. And I think we look at that as that's not acceptable, but also, we're a regulatory body. And so we regulate the private market. And so I think there are levers for us to use. And so that's kind of one side about, leveraging private development to get community benefits. But then to your point, I think there is some additional work we need to do. We're kind of starting small, and we need to build out. I hope that answered your question. Sorry, it's a little long-winded.
No, yeah, thank you for your candidness on this. I know it's not a easy topic, but I appreciate, I think, just the candidness, and Sam, Katie, I do hope that we do get to engage with some of those community groups in the future. But I think what I'll say is, I think, I hope maybe this task force still comes together. I think it's still a missed opportunity as we're potentially talking about an infrastructure bill, down the road. Like, it seems like a missed opportunity if we're not even prepared for that locally around how do we really rethink, the economy. And I think PCEF is just one real small sliver and to miss an opportunity like those federal investments, I think it just makes the challenge even more difficult for things that we're trying to do here at PCEF. So, I mean, I'm just rambling here, but I think it's just, just trying to just state my sort of desires and, what I'm hearing at least here. But thank you for that kindness.
Yeah, and I agree with you.
I do. I see hands up from Jeffrey and then Michael and Faith. But I did just want to do a quick time check. It's 6:55, and I think that we can, push it a few minutes, particularly we don't have a large number of people from the public who are in attendance. So we may just go a few minutes over and push that 15-minute break where there's a community conversation. I also, Andrea, Catherine, Dwight, would invite you to stay and join one of the breakout rooms and maybe talk with smaller groups of committee members about anti-displacement stuff. So, but I wanted to pass it then to Jeffrey, and then unless Michael, did you have something you wanted to? I saw your other
Andrea,
hand go up.
My question was, Andrea, do you still have one more slide to go?
Oh, it's just the contact slide.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Jeffrey.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. My biggest thing about this whole anti-displacement thing is, what about the jobs for the community? We look at the Rose Quarter that went in through the Black community, look at Emmanuel Hospital went through the Black community, look at the Convention Center that went through the Black community. None of those jobs went to the people that actually lived in the community. So when you put those improvements in the community and you don't invest in the community, then of course, when the property taxes go up, the people that are on fixed incomes or on low income don't have the ability to stay in that area, thus the gentrification. So I guess my biggest question is, what are we doing to ensure that these actual projects are going to people that live in the community, people that look like the people that actually are in those communities, so that they can stay in those communities because they're actually benefiting financially. There's actually income coming in their community, so they can actually patronize their own businesses and keep their own economy going.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I'm sure that maybe PCEF folks want to answer too, but one thing we took out the slide that we typically show, which is of our inventory, and one of the parts of the report gets at all of the actions that the city currently is doing, and so those are split up by the categories of housing, business, workforce, and community resilience. Because we specifically wanted to get at that workforce question. We know that like the best economic strategy and housing strategy it's a job strategy. So a lot of what we, detailed in that inventory are programs that the city has, and different bureaus are doing, better and worse jobs at this, but it's really promoting equitable hiring, contracting, equitable contracting. So those are the kinds of things that are like big systems changes that we definitely have our eye on also. And I think that those are key anti-displacement strategies. And now in terms of, obviously getting the city to do that well is a big task. I think getting PCEF to really contemplate that and, how that's working within your projects that you're picking, I think that's an excellent question. I hope that that's a huge focus.
And
thanks, Andrea. Sam, did you want to just real quick?
Let me for the I'll let the conversation keep going. Let me come back on that later.
Michael.
Hey, thanks for coming out and talking with us. I was just wondering how much pushback. I have a little experience and it hasn't been great, but how much pushback do you get from civic life and the neighborhood associations? Or have you seen any pushback when it comes to anti-displacement measures?
That's a hard question. So we, I think we have only recently started heading out to the neighborhood associations, really just with the foundation report. I think our kind of next steps involve kind of, again, looking at things in DPS's wheelhouse that we can implement and kind of doing some community workshops to identify priorities, et cetera, for specific projects. So I think some of that pushback will come in there because, I mean, there will be proposals like upzoning really low density exclusive areas of the city. So we'll get it. It's coming. You know, but in fairness, the meetings we've had so far, we've generally been asked and people are very supportive and trying to figure out how they can help. You know, the coalition is, you know, BIPOC led. And so most of there's an interesting dynamic of a lot of the neighborhood associations, not surprisingly, have more white folks in them. And so a lot of questions around how they can support the work. And so so far it's been pretty good. I think the pushback's going to come when we start talking about real proposals in the fall. So it's coming.
Catherine, can you just share what upzoning is? Just to make sure we're all...
Yeah, so upzoning would be like going from like a single family zone where you can build like a house, or now with residential infill, you could build, you know, 2 or 3, 4 units to a much higher density. So you could now build, you know, a 20-unit apartment building. So there's one of the things that's been on the table for a long time that would face a lot of pushback is, you know, some areas that are pretty much impossible for folks to get into these days financially, upzoning some of those to get more units into those places that already have high amenity levels. And so that's gonna not be very popular with those neighborhood associations. And so that's coming. I think we haven't really put out a lot of specific things that we would like to do thus far, and that pushback will come when we put those on the table. But that's why we have the coalition, right? To help us advocate for the things that we know are the right things to do.
I will say that that's kind of like the structure of the project, and we're still in the front part of the work where we're very openly prioritizing certain voices, and those that we're choosing to prioritize are the ones of the people who are most likely to be impacted by displacement risks. So we are not spending a lot of time engaging people who already are pretty stable in their communities. And that's on purpose. I'll just be very frank.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrea. Faith, and then Ramses.
I'll just comment. I'm glad you're taking that stance and prioritizing those folks. I have just one comment and 2 questions. The comment is, I think a screen is super valuable and could be super valuable for PCEF. So like the questions that are on the screen right now would be a great screen. It would be even more useful if there was direction on how to use it. So if you answered, for example, if all of the questions could result in an affirmative or in a negative, but consistently, then you could say, oh, 3 of my questions are signaling a warning sign for me. So now what do I do? Right? So that would be a more useful tool if we could do that. And I understand the difficulty of that. And then I guess that's the other recommendation. Is there a body, is it you all that are willing to have a conversation, or is there the task force, for example? Is that something that they might be, or the community task force, right? Is that something that they might be open to, I guess, is when people have questions that they want to wrestle with, is that something that they might be willing to do? So where do we go if we have concerns about projects, basically? 2 questions. One is, what do you want to know from us? If you're at the very beginning and we have this amazing group of community projects that are coming in the door, is there something that we can be evaluating on your behalf and feeding you information? You know, we have this amazing opportunity, right, when we're going to hear a lot of feedback from communities. So you might think about, is there a particular question that you want us to be looking for, answering, collecting data on? And you don't have to know that right now. I guess that's one of the questions, though. What do you want to know from us? My last question is a little bit, well, my last question is there anybody at the city talking seriously about taking housing and community services out of the speculative market? One way to deal with anti-displacement is to take it out of, the investment stream. So if we start having housing policy instead of real estate policy, we'd be in a very different place. Is there anybody talking about that?
All right, I am going to attempt to answer your first questions first, and then we will get to the fun one. So in terms of, these questions, they actually came from a flow chart that does actually get you into like categorizing things. However, that flow chart is kind of a nightmare to look at as like a presentation. So yes, I would love to, I think Catherine and I would very much be happy to make this as useful as possible for the grants committee. So we could throw something out at you and you can see, oh, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And then we would love that feedback. That would be helpful for us. In terms of who within the city is talking about expropriating wealth. Now, I think that those conversations are the ones that we hear the most from our coalition partners. And I know that, for example, like I sit in on the conversations that are happening with the Kali TIF district folks. And they are definitely talking about like, how can we remove as much housing out of the speculative market and potentially district. Oh, what? Sorry, TIF district. Yes, the urban renewal. So tax increment financing. I'm so sorry. Terrible at acronyms. But so that is when you draw a boundary and you suddenly are taking like the taxes that are accrue, in that area, and you're just reinvesting them into like in that area, and you're not sending them to other taxing districts like the school district or the county, et cetera. So it's basically what funds urban renewal areas. So the Cully neighborhood is contemplating the idea of starting a community-led tax increment financing district. And so one of the reasons that they want to do this is because they want to be able to do things like acquire property to take it out of the speculative market. So they are in like pretty, deep conversations with Prosper and Housing at this point to think about how they would go about doing this. But it's those are big conversations that will take years. But that is the number one priority that we've heard from our coalition partners. It's like they want housing that is permanently affordable and community owned, rather than kind of the standard subsidized affordable housing, which is already difficult enough to achieve. And we definitely don't have nearly enough.
Yeah, and in parallel with that, we're looking at ways to incent those kind of shared equity models through the zoning code. That also is in its infancy, but that would kind of potentially sit right alongside what Andrea was talking about.
Thanks, Catherine. So I see Ramsis's hand up, and I wanted to let you say one final thing, but I maybe ask if it's a question, if we can follow up with the answer. I want to. We're trying pretty hard to stay on schedule with the break time where the public is invited to participate, just in case people sort of plan to log on at 7 and then plan to log off after. So, Ramses, if you want to go ahead and give your question or comment, knowing that you'll get an answer at a later date.
Perfect. Appreciate the conversation and many of the questions asked on the committee. And, I do appreciate the, Jeffrey's comment here earlier. And I feel like kind of almost in alignment here with this last question on the slide. I think I heard sort of density as a solution, but I think just recognizing experience in different parts of Portland I've lived in, like we've seen parts of Portland get denser, but that doesn't mean the benefits have gone to the folks who historically lived there. So I think that question still remains, and I could see us insert, say, like a question like this in a PCEF application in some form, but how does that really translate into something that we effectively, evaluate? I think that for me is a real long-term question here, is like, how do we take real key questions and turn those into questions that are empowering community, and helping sort of right the balance here for community groups who are saying, yeah, we need to find a way to better share wealth and really create wealth opportunities. You know, in the same vein here, like we've talked about density, but, you know, we're still dealing with the issue of, you know, a lack of Black or Brown or POC ownership, home ownership, which is its own, you know, own issue. And so I think, you know, sorry, I might be rambling here on these outstanding questions, but I think those are questions I'd love to, you know, meditate more with your team as well as with community, because I think those are really important here for PCEF to try to find a way, no matter how imperfect, to sort of improve on some of the social benefit aspects of our application. So anyway, I think I'm digressing at this point, but I think those are just some of the key things I hope to at least try to get an answer or digest or meditate with others in the future.
Thanks, Ramses. And thanks, Catherine and Andrea, so much. Clearly, we could have just had the meeting about this topic and filled all of the time. I do want to reiterate that you know, and if you have time and inclination to stay and go into the community conversation space, that, you know, be interested in hearing what members of the public think about this and kind of furthering the conversation. So it's 7:08 now. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we're going to split into 2 breakout groups. We're going into 2 because there are only 8 committee members here tonight. The committee members will be assigned. James will place you in your breakout rooms. Members of the public who are participating via Zoom, if you're watching on YouTube, unfortunately, this part is inaccessible to you, but members of the public, you should see a little box with squares inside of it pop up when the breakout room option becomes available. And if you click on that, then you should be able to join and whichever breakout room you want to. And also there's an option to leave the breakout room and go to the other one. So you should be able to navigate around. If you run into trouble with that, just send a message in the chat to James and we can kind of help you get where you're trying to go. So now it's 7:09 and we're going to let's take a 4-minute break, if that's all right. Come back at 7:13 and then we'll move into the 2 breakout rooms. All right, thank you.
I want to just thank Andrea and Catherine.
presenting and being a part of the conversations during that break. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam and to move into a conversation, sort of revisiting the threshold review.
Okay, and Katie, you're gonna share those slides again? I think you got to share the slides again since we bumped out.
Sorry about that. Forgot that I was not sharing the slides still.
Sorry. Okay. So this next piece, I got to reorient my screen. Oh, Katie, we're seeing your presenter mode screen, FYI.
You are. That's so weird. Okay, hold on one second. Let me try a new share.
And I can share too. Let me know. So
how's that?
All right. Well, I think this next piece that we've missed a couple of times to chat about was we wanted to, now that we've sort of given you all a sense for the conversation on minimum scores and the intent around minimum scores, we want to now pivot to coming back to the conversation on thresholds. And so they're related. And so coming back from the minimum scores are in recognition that we're moving a significant volume of money this next RFP, this next request for proposals. It was really important to set that so that we're able to confidently be in a situation where we're funding projects, good projects that we believe both meet eligibility but also line up with the intent of the program. Now, but minimum scores do have the function of reducing some of the applications that may go to scoring panels. And so this is how they're related. And so we'll talk about threshold review. And so threshold review and what we've laid out here, but it's really teasing out and the critical problem, Ramses, to your point, the critical problem that, or the statement that we want to come to this conversation with is just that we know that last round we received 140 applications. 2 of the applications did not pass minimum, or 3 of them didn't get past the eligibility criteria. 2 of them didn't pass the technical review. So we had 135 applications go to scoring panels. And folks on the scoring panels reviewed anywhere from 13 applications to close to 20 applications on the committee at least. And so we know that this coming round, we expect that we're probably going to receive north of 200 applications, and that committee member, as well as, if you all are assuming that there's been an appetite for it, but committee member, as well as community participation through the cohorts that we've talked about previously, the outreach cohorts, is going to likely be the limiting factor in terms of thinking about how many proposals we can send to scoring factors and really scoring panels, and just the amount of time that any individual has to contribute to reviewing proposals and scoring them. And so what we're proposing here is to come up with an approach, which is using a threshold, come up with an approach that can manage and respond to the capacity that we suspect that exists within the committee. And so none of these are all just examples for the conversation you'll see in the next slide in terms of the numbers are in this slide, but at least it gives you a sense of the way we're thinking about it. And we have questions at the end so that we'll pose directly to you so you can think about. But so what we have here and what we've identified here is a potential path that we think could line up with some of what the committee has expressed interest in and meet that. And so the example path here that we're laying out is a scenario where the committee and community cohort scores applications in the margin, so that we would have 3-member scoring panels that would have a committee member on there, a community cohort member on there, as well as a staff member on there. And that the way that it would work is that 2 staff members would do the initial scoring and rank all of the projects across all the funding areas, going all the way down the list. And it certainly is dependent on the number of applications received and the amount of the funding request. But assuming that we're receiving more than 90 applications, and that the 90 applications both pass the minimum score and exceed our funding request, then we would, the staff would do the review, and then the scoring panels would just get 90 applications and send you those, essentially the 90 applications that are on the margin. And so, and we've got a diagram in the next slide to kind of describe what this could look like. So I know that the words may not sink in as I know this took a visual for me. but 6 scoring panels comprised of 1 committee member, 1 community cohort member, 1 staff member would score those 90 applications on the margins, and then the final scores would be used to develop the portfolios for your the sample portfolios for your deliberation and eventually your thought and eventually your recommendation. So, and I will dive into it in the next slide, but just based on what's here, are there any questions here? Clarifying questions. Okay.
I have a question. Sorry, I lost my raised hand button. Can't find it for some reason. Is there a reason why there's only 6 scoring panels and not 9?
We'll talk about that, I think, in the next slide. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Let's move to the next slide. I realize I have a different slide up. I moved my other presentation in front. Okay. So the reason that we propose, and this is just pulling something together for you all that you want to respond to, is that we would have a scoring audit subcommittee, and that's the reason that we're proposing six scoring panels, because the scenario we're laying out here is that there's a scoring audit subcommittee, which would be comprised of 3 committee members, and then 6 committee members would be part of the actual scoring of applications. And the reason we sort of lined up with those neat numbers is as part of the outreach cohort that we're pulling together, we're going to be pulling in 6 cohort members as part of our outreach cohort. So it just all neatly lined up. It was like we have 6 outreach cohort members, then we could pull in 6 committee members to pair up with each of them on a scoring panel, along with staff for each of the scoring panels. And so that leaves 3 committee members that could be part of an audit subcommittee, which we've discussed a little bit. And so that was, Robin, that was the thinking, is that those 3 other members would be on the audit subcommittee. And so that's sort of why you have just 6 scoring panels. The audit subcommittee would function and be split into a few things. You all would be reviewing 6 applications that did not meet the minimum score. So you'd be screening those, a sample of 6 of them. So looking through it, and then maybe before I even jump through that, actually, let me just describe this diagram what we did here. That maybe the visual may be more helpful to walk through. What we did here is we just to try to demonstrate what this could look like. We laid out a scenario where you have 200 applications. And so what you see here is in the red is sort of the application score on the lowest scores, and the green is the highest scores. And what we expect, one approach we could take to the threshold review is where the top 10% of applications, with 20 applications, automatically are going to get funded. So those applications are going to get funded. The next 90 applications are really the ones that go to the scoring panels. And then there's 70 below that 90, and then there's 20 below that don't pass the minimum score. And so the purpose of the audit subcommittee would be they'd be taking a sample of 6 of those that are below the minimum scores, 6 of the projects that fall in this blue range that don't make it to the scoring panels, and then 3 projects that are in the top 10. Then they'd be reviewing those and saying, did staff score those right? Did we get those right? Did we apply sort of the application of thresholds appropriately? And so this just gives you a sense of it. And this question, I think that we're going to need to wrestle and come up with a little bit more of a refined framework, is that it's really, we don't know what is the dollar value of projects that we're going to get in and the number of projects that we're going to get in. So what we don't really know is exactly amongst this 90 applications that you all, on scoring panels potentially review, where the funding cutoff exists. It could be a scenario, and I think it could be a scenario where I will acknowledge, I don't suspect this is the case, but I think we're going to have to come back to it, that if there are top 20 applications are all $3 million applications, that's 60 million right there. And so I think what we propose having is an approach where if there's a scenario where the top 20 applications account for more than a third of the funding, or more than some percentage of the funding, that we bring together the committee after we've done that initial scoring, and we rejigger in a sense what applications you all review on the margins. So, but this just gives you a sense. There's a question that we're not going to quite know until we really get the applications in, do the initial scoring, see the value of each of those applications and where they stand.
Michael?
I was wondering, in the So for your top 20 and your top 90 scored by your top 20 and your top 90, are those going to be also divided up by category too? So that the top 20 aren't all in one category or in two categories? Will you be dividing them sort of?
I think so. I think that's right. Just because of the fact that we're a part of, I mean, we'll come back to it when we feel we brought it all back together, but just because of the fact that as part of some of our evaluation work and findings and some of the revisions that we're going to be bringing to the application, we're going to be separating out. I think what we're going to be recommending is separating out some of the applications. And so it's going to be important for that exact reason, Michael, that as part of the top 20 we are sort of representing, you know, of that, here's the green infrastructure ones, here's the clean energy ones, here's the workforce ones, so that it isn't just because, and if we did this approach last round, it would have been all of the workforce projects that rose to the top. And that's just because it's just the nature of that. So yes, thank you. That's a great question. And mind you, we still have to fine tune this, but we're putting this out so you all can chew on it, so we can hear responses back, so we can come back and bring some more finer details. But it's exactly those that we know we'll have to spell out in more detail what that'll look like.
Faith?
This isn't exactly what you're pointing us to, but how is staff scoring all of the applications? I'm just thinking about capacity. So if we have 200 applications and it took me 3 hours or so, right, to review each application, that's 600 hours per staff. That's 3 months of work, 3 months of a lot of work.
I think maybe if I could, Sam, I had it 2.5 hours, but because staff are fast.
Oh yeah, I know. You guys are awesome. Yeah.
2.5 hours on each, and we get 200 applications. Yeah, it's 500 hours. There are, if we have 2 staff score each application, then and we have 10 staff who are working on it, then that's about 100 hours per staff person. So if we spread that out over 4 weeks, we could be spending 25 hours a week doing scoring for a month and kind of get through that initial phase. It is a lot, and it will, it makes the sort of review, it extends the review period a little bit. I mean, and some of our staff might have more capacity at that time and be able to do 40 hours a week for a couple of weeks and absorb more of that. But that's the math we're doing.
Thank you, Katie.
I have a follow-up question to that. I guess I'm assuming, maybe I should assume here, but I assume y'all sort of did the analysis around, to Faith's question, like the time it takes for staff to do all the readings and the capacity put into that, and how if that's more efficient than reviewing all the applications through the committees. Because I think the original intention here was to save time for what we can't do all together, but are we adding more time? I guess, is the analysis here that we've saved more time and reduced staff capacity involvement on this?
There's probably some staff time that we save just as a function of coordination, that it's easier to coordinate staff than certainly committee members, but it's more that we have staff that we pay to work on this stuff for 40 hours a week, and so it's more that it's more how much more can we ask that of community members. So we certainly have, on the score on the community cohorts, we've found the right balance. That it feels like the right balance for the cohort members. But I know that, I guess we're, and some of what, and Katie chime in, and some of what we heard, we know that it was we know that there was a lot of review, and we know that we're expecting more. So I will acknowledge, we're still expecting committee members to be doing review on at least about 15 applications each. And that would be spread across both the audit subcommittee as well as those that are on scoring panels. So I guess I do want to show that there is still an expectation. It's just how much. I mean, there's just there is an absolute amount of time that it takes to do the review. Sure, staff will be faster. I'll say that staff will be. I consider confidently will be faster, but
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just add that this is certainly not driven by efficiency. It is driven by just that there's a limited number of committee members. There is always has been sort of conceptualized that there would be at least one staff person, so that there's someone on staff who's like really intimately familiar with the application and kind of can coordinate the back and forth and logistics and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, maybe just to back up what Sam said, we have people who, this is our job, and we have more hours that we have to work on it in a week. Manfis?
Well, I think I'll definitely have to digest this. I know we've been talking about this for some time. I think, yeah, I'd definitely love to continue thinking about just this approach and what's most efficiency, but at least I'm hearing that it's less about what's most efficient and more about the constraints of us in the committee here. You know, I think just some, comments here, like, I think I've been part of grant making bodies where we've read 30 applications. Not to say that we should pace for us to do 30 per cohort. But, I think definitely thinking, continue to find ways to get more community reviewers or more committee members. I don't know what the solution is, but, I think it does seem almost duplicative for staff to review all the applications and then whittle that down and still have the committee to review them. And then I don't know if staff is expected to score them again in the second round, but I think it does feel a bit duplicative. So I just want to note that. And, if I were to, have my vantage point about, say we had that 100 hours for staff to put in, seems like the most meaningful area to put in that time would be engaging with community, with those who are facing the barriers to apply, whether they're language barriers or folks who've never applied before. But I get that where we're at this stage, but I guess I'm now starting to think about that 100 hours of staff reviewing this application in a very different way. I guess just to kind of consider here.
Katie, would it be worthwhile to speak to some of the feedback? I mean, some of the feedback, I don't know, some of the feedback, I'm trying to think about how to share this around just, I guess what I would acknowledge, it takes, this year will be our first year doing the community cohorts, and I know that we've talked about this quite a bit, last year, and I wanted to say that I think that that's something that we want to be really intentional about, given a lot of just feedback we've heard from partners and others that have employed those models, and just what it means to do that well, and the quality of sort of folks actually understanding the criteria and the time investment you need to put into individuals to make sure that they have what they need to appropriately score. And we have the benefit of having you all over the course of the year moving along this journey with us. And so I guess I don't want to, I appreciate that emphasis in terms of certainly having more community reviewers. And this year, I just want to acknowledge it's another step in figuring out what we have is a more resource intensive model. I want to acknowledge that. I mean, we're paying each of the community reviewers on the scale of $15,000 as part of a broader project, but a big chunk of that is to be on these review panels. And so we're going to see whether that, what that looks like in terms of start with 6, and then we can get into constraints around why we landed at 6. A lot of it is contracting constraints, but start with 6 and then see next year, okay, we started with 6 last year. What does it look like to potentially move that from there, and what worked well, what didn't? But so I do want to acknowledge that that's something that we heard very clearly last year. And I think what at least what we're hoping to communicate is that's sort of the trade-off we're trying to balance with the community cohort model.
Michael, and then Faith. Oh, you're muted, Michael.
Oh God, you'd think I do the Zoom meetings all day, but I do not. I would like to first say I hope everybody that wants to talk is getting an opportunity to speak here on the committee. My question for, I guess, Sam and Katie is, as you're scoring these, looking for minimum scores, are you going to be focusing on looking at like organizational information, project description? What are you going to look at, like social benefits initially, to see if it even passes that muster? If it doesn't get minimum score because the organizational information is, it doesn't, represent PCEF priority populations, or, their answers are scored low. Do you skip the rest of those and just kind of speed up your process? Are you going to be reviewing every aspect of everything? Are you going to prioritize looking at certain scoring sections in order to sort of figure out who's already coming in below minimum score quickly?
That is a tough one. That's a tough one. It would be great if there was just sort of like, one criteria that we could say, we're only going to look at that. And, if they are below the minimum, then with that, then that kind of puts them into that bucket that we don't have to read the rest of the application. That would certainly create a lot of efficiency. I will say that, when we will be coming back in July with a sort of like well-developed plan related to the minimum score based on the feedback that we got from y'all at the last meeting. And it is likely to be a sort of a minimum threshold that crosses a few different categories. I certainly, I heard no appetite from the committee to have the budget be part of the minimum score, or sort of the, finances be part of the minimum score, but there definitely is, considerations in both organizational information and project description and scope and environmental benefits and social benefits. So I think what we're doing right now is kind of trying to come up with a more refined description of what that means to you back in July. But it's unlikely that it will be a method that means that staff can just like really quickly figure out who falls below that. Will require reading the whole application. Sam, did you have something you wanted to add?
And I guess what I would add is that it really, and in part because I think what we see here, right, the 20% being below, or 10% being below the minimum score, 10% being sort of above this, I think that's sort of our expectation that it probably would be something, it wouldn't be that many that would probably not meet the minimum score. It's there to make sure that we're not funding. But if we look at round one applications and we kind of just, get a feel for, okay, that really is probably below, as we look at sort of those projects, we kind of got the sense that it's probably 10%. And so, I just, it's not perfect. It's what I want to acknowledge there, Michael, from your perspective, as I'm thinking about sort of the workflow perspective, is that because it's a small amount of projects, I suspect that we're going to need to get eyes on it's a small portion of projects that wouldn't meet the minimum score. So it may probably just make sense to just read through all of them in one sweep, as opposed to reading through a few sections, then coming back, just because of once you're reading through an application, it doesn't take much longer to read through a few more sections. So, but we still need to fine tune some of that, just what that process is going to look like for us.
Okay.
I want to follow Michael's excellent example and cede any time that I have to somebody who hasn't had a chance to share too, if there's somebody that wants to jump in. All right, well, I'll be super quick. I just wanted to offer the reflection that I think this is creative and really useful, and working within the constraints that we have. And I'm sure that there are also other ways, but it feels like it meets our goals and our principles and our guiding principles. So so thank you for that. And I guess one request is, and you've already said that it would be true, but I just want to lift it up again and say, we might not get 200 applications, right? It might be something wildly different, in which case we have to revisit when we actually have the applications in. And so just at least an acknowledgement from me and hopefully from everyone on the committee that we may have best intentions around this and discover that we've gotten an application base that looks really different than what we planned for. So we have to modify and be nimble. So I know that we're all capable, and I know staff is totally capable of that. So I look forward to that. And I guess with this conversation is also reminding me, I know that it's not based on purely on efficiency, which was really helpful. Thank you, Katie, for sharing that. That's a really helpful framing for us. One way to make sure that committee members and community see more is to make simpler applications, right? And I know that we've heard that from community all along too, is how do we make this application process even simpler, and that makes our review process even simpler. So, or potentially, not necessarily, I guess those aren't necessarily correlated, but it could be. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Faith.
So we've got a few questions posed for you all on the second slide. So I think we can move to the next slide and then see what else comes up based on some of these questions. And any other, and please respond back with any other things that are coming up. But questions we want you all to think about is just, do all committee members want to commit to serving on a scoring panel? I think we've heard some of this already come out prior, but what concerns do you have about not seeing all the applications go to scoring panels? Are there ways to mitigate these concerns beyond sort of what I think what we're hoping, what we've proposed? How do you feel about the example where the committee and community cohort score the applications on the margin? So there's that's a piece of what I think we've designed an example. And then just what's the most important thing that you'd want the audit subcommittee to be watching for? And then anything else. And I know we've heard other pieces around making sure it's a transparent process and folks are getting their feedback and that we're documenting all of that. But anything else that may be coming up for folks around this?
Megan?
Thanks for the creative thinking and the questions. I'll just answer a few of them myself. I think this is a pretty creative solution. We use a similar one in our grad school review, and it seems to be relatively efficient. Well, we just talk about the ones in the middle anyway, because the rest of them we kind of assume. But I think one area where the audit committee might need to be looking, or where there just is where there's really divergent scores, although I wonder if they would just end up landing in the middle anyway. But I guess just like the whole thing that some people, we just all bring different biases to scoring, and some of us are harder scorers than others, and some of us, even with all the instruction we have agreed upon, and we read it differently. So something in there about that. And I'm not quite sure how that would play out on the bar graph in the last one, but something to keep in mind.
Thanks, Megan. Shanice?
Yeah, I can respond to a couple of these. I think I'm willing to serve on a scoring panel. My perspective, and first I want to name too that I appreciate the structure being given here on how we may go about scoring in an audit, and I resonate with that. I think our role as committee members, at the 50,000 foot view level is really, I'm just reflecting on the space of creating goals and outcomes and kind of assessing each year and being grounded in that space versus being in the weeds of each application. So I'm just reflecting on that. And I don't have any concerns about not all applications going to scoring panels. I think that our guiding principles are coherent enough to set up the structure where the communities this fund is intended to serve will be seen in the process. And so, you know, in relation to like these other elements, right, of our grant criteria as well. But those are some initial or some reactions there.
Thank you, Shanice.
And I'll just add in, I didn't name it, but I think just acknowledging the capacity, you know, it takes to kind of review the scoring or to do scoring and reviewing applications. I want to be conscientious also of staff time and, you know, having this layer of community participates does mean things. So I think we could play a role here and in an impactful way in that space and you know, can help fill the gaps with some of those capacity pieces. And know we tried a little of that in one way or another. But yeah, just reflecting on that, and I'm not sure if there is a solution that we are chewing on with that, or if we feel like, okay, after this year, let's see how this kind of feels. But yeah, just want to name, I will create the time and take vacations or do what I gotta do, you know, with the kind of expectation set with how we may lean in and when that looks.
Thanks, Shanice. Sam, I just want to do a quick time check. It's 8:03, and I know that the conversation that you wanted to have about the audit response is can't be bumped to the next meeting. That's a time sensitive item. So wanted to see how you were feeling about moving on.
Yeah, I want to see if there's any other comments for anyone that hasn't shared first that feels they want to share or anything else, and then I think I'm happy to move on. Okay.
I would also maybe just invite folks to, you know, if you're thinking about this later and you have a thought, as always, just to reach out directly to Sam or I or Michael or Maria if you want to kind of provide more input on this or have some reflections that you want to share.
Yeah, there's still a good bit of this that we've got to start writing down, and so the more that we hear, the more that we can really think through. Okay, where do we? It all every bit of it helps. Thank you. Okay. Next slide. So this is the audit response. So we're coming close. We're getting close to the auditor's office wrapping up their audit, and we've got a meeting here in the very near future to see the draft of the final audit. And so so you all know from the process perspective, once we receive the draft of the final audit, what happens is that the audit's office takes takes staff feedback, makes and your co-chairs will be in that meeting as well. We'll take feedback from Michael Maria as well, make their final edits, and then provide us a final audit copy. It's still a confidential audit, and so what happens at that point is then they give us 2 weeks to respond. Because you all are a public body and a committee, you all as a full body cannot respond to that draft audit unless it's been made public. And so staff and the commissioner's office are given the first opportunity to respond prior to it becoming public. So when the audit gets released, ultimately when it does become public, it's released as here's our audit and here's the response to the audit. So that's the way it ultimately is released when it is finally released from the public as a final product. And so as part of that, the commissioner's office will be asked to respond. staff will be asked to respond. And what we want to check in with you all is see how you all want to bring in the committee voice, because there's a few different options for how you all are how the committee is captured, represented, or just the voice that can be brought into that. And so I wanted to make sure folks understood that option, in part because we're coming pretty close to those conversations, and it's important we understand, because I think in the 3 paths, so I just want to make sure folks understand really that ultimately when the final audit is published, it's going to be published with a response alongside that. And that response can ultimately be it's the commissioner's office staff, and we'll talk about the options here, your committee co-chairs and potentially 2 other committee members, or it can just be commissioner's office. And commissioner office, I will acknowledge, Commissioner Ruby's office may do a separate response, separate from staff. So they're able to do a separate response, but it may be commissioner's office does a separate response. You know, the bureau does a response, and all of that gets published as part of the final audit. Although it's very common for commissioner's office and the bureau to do a response together, and that gets published with the final audit. So I see Michael. Sorry, let me stop talking. I see you.
I just want to say a clarifying point, which is Maria and I will get to see the audit before, but it won't actually be shared with the rest of the committee. That's the part I had trouble wrapping my head about, was like, oh, the rest of the committee doesn't get to see it beforehand. So I just want to make sure that is clear.
Thank you, Michael. So that's right. And so the 3 options essentially for the committee to respond is, 1, it could be that Michael, Maria, and up to 2 other additional committee members, it just can't be a quorum, could decide we want to at least be part of the discussions with staff and the commissioner's office and see if we want to write a response together and co-draft a response all together. And then when the audit finally gets published, it gets published, and alongside that response that would be undersigned potentially, you know, Commissioner Rubio, the Bureau of Planning Sustainability staff, these 4 PCEF committee members, these 2 PCEF or PCEF co-chairs. There's a few different ways. If the committee as a whole decided, no, we want to respond as a full body as a whole, then it has to be released publicly first, and then you all can see it, and then deliberate on it, and release it publicly, and then draft a response. I will be frank in this. When the audit gets released, there's a moment in terms of the public. There's a moment in terms of being able to respond once it's released. And so, if it was released? All right, let me go back to that. If it was released, we will definitely as staff be part of an initial response that would get published. And so it's really how we want to bring in the committee feedback to that. And I just want to acknowledge that when it gets published, there is a moment there where that is when folks will generally be picking it up and looking at it. So that's, I think, that what we're trying to suss out here, and what we checked in with Michael and Maria about is what's the committee's appetite for having a response that is done by staff alongside the committee co-chairs and potentially 2 other folks if another couple of folks are interested, versus letting it go public and then the committee as a whole responding. And then the 3rd option, which I think it's merit to discuss, would be some sort of hybrid where staff alongside the co-chairs and potentially 2 others respond to the audit and that response gets published, and then the committee as a whole reads and decides they want to, you all want to provide an additional addendum or additional response.
That makes sense. Are there any questions about that? Yeah.
So the impact of the response going out with the audit when they're both made public is that it's a little more impactful than making a response afterwards.
I think, right, Michael, to answer your question, I think I would. My assumption would be yes. That generally speaking, that from a broader public picking up the audit, that's going to happen in the immediate aftermath of its response, or the immediate aftermath of it being published. Sorry.
Robin, and then Megan?
Yeah, I think I get it. I guess my viewpoints is I generally trust the co-chairs to represent the board of the voice of the board. At the same time, I don't want to refrain or prevent any committee member from having an opportunity to share that voice. So I think for me, it's just optional. Give people the opportunity to review and provide comments if they desire, but I don't think we should mandate that we have to have 4 people. I also hope there would be an opportunity if there is something controversial that is identified in the audit, that there is an opportunity to discuss conceptually. Obviously, we can't talk about the details, but discuss conceptually with the broader committee to get a sense of how we may want to respond to that. So I know that's a very gray line thin line that I'm kind of painting there, but I'd like to have some mechanism where there is an opportunity for the broader committee to chime in if that situation is warranted. So that's my kind of 2 cents on this.
Thanks, Robin. I see Megan and then Ranfis and Shanice.
Yeah, Robin sort of summed up, I guess, sort of my reactions. And I think in our agenda or somewhere I saw like a specific question or alternative you were proposing to us, maybe. Are we talking too soon before that? But so it's a little hard to respond to, this slightly unknown thing. But I do trust our co-chairs, but I liked the idea of reserving the possibility of our committee engaging in dialogue or adding our own comments. And it definitely, as possible, would like to talk about things that arise in it. But if it's all pretty smooth sailing and our co-chairs feel like their voices were represented, then I don't need to delay a lot. I guess I'm not sure if I've answered the specific question you're posing to us, Sam.
Say that again, Megan. Say the last.
I'm not sure now. I've maybe lost track of the specific question you posed to us.
Yeah, I realized I should have moved to the next slide. Katie, can you move to the next slide? So it's really trying to make sure that we've got these 3 paths here, and just from a technicality perspective, right? I think Michael and Maria currently are empowered because it's really the audit response is really a communication mechanism. We talked to the city attorney's office about this. It's called an anticipatory communications, and so it's there. But because it is a significant thing, I think it was important. I think what we said is probably an important thing to just check in and say, how do folks feel about each one of these paths? Do folks feel really that really it should be, let's let city staff, commissioner's office respond to the audit, let it get published, and as a full committee come back and we'll respond when the committee reviewed it and deliberated on it and had that. Versus, so there's a few. So that's. So I just wanted to be clear what path are folks, and it is. I think it'd be fair to say I don't know if it's this would be a place to have a committee make a decision. Probably is it path 1, 2, or 3? And so in the 3, Megan, that you referenced it really would be moving forward with path 1, and this option really doesn't ever go away. It's still the ability after it comes out, the committee would still have an option to draft a response. And based on just what I've heard from Robin and you, Megan, right now, is also, I think Michael and Maria hearing that can be part of those conversations in terms of the response and call out in the response. This is an area that the PCEF committee will deliberate on. There's ways for areas where they feel like, okay, this is an area we should just not really directly respond to this. And so I think there's ways you can think about that. It's just to be frank, it's awkward. It's awkward because of the nature of public meeting laws and this committee being a unique committee in this role.
Ramses and then Shanice. Sorry, Michael, go ahead. Just wanted to make sure they got in there. Did you have something related to that?
Yeah, I did. I just had a quick comeback, which is and it was just a personal note, which was that for me, I think that as we go through this audit process, that for Maria and I, if we have 2 other committee members that don't necessarily have to be there, but that we could talk to if we have complicated or really drastic things that we think we'd like to get input from other committee members on. It would be great to have 2 people for that just in case.
Thanks, Michael. Francis and then Shanice.
I think this seems like we're setting this precedent about how we engage and respond to audits. I will definitely vote for the committee taking an active role in this and not a passive role. I think my thoughts are, my personal thoughts and preferences that I would hope that the committee would all at least be able to see the audit before it goes out. I know the limitations around, I can sort of understand the limitations of us meeting together to create a response, but I guess I don't understand, maybe I misheard, like why we all can't review what's in the audit before it's released. That part I don't understand fully, but maybe I just misheard. At the same time, I don't know really the limitations of us having a unified response, whether it's, my understanding with the quorum issue, it's not 8 people responding with edits, it's 4 people, it's 8 people, or basically us coming together to create quorum in a public meeting set. So I guess I'm trying to wrestle with what the restrictions are. I understand that maybe there might just be limitations capacity wise for maybe our committee to be fully involved for this. But I do think, I'll just conclude. I think we should take a proactive role because I think we're setting the precedent how we do this. And right now, I think we're also setting the precedent for what we expect the co-chairs, which I think is still unclear what their role is on the charter, but it does feel like we're going to start building tasks for the co-chairs moving forward, which I don't necessarily am against, but I think when we had adopted and approved co-chairs, one thing I was concerned early is co-chair burnout, which I'd seen in other committees in other bodies. So anyway, I'm digressing right now, but I think just kind of noting some of my questions, and Katie seemed like you had maybe a response to one of my questions.
Yeah, and I think that Sam probably does as well. I just wanted to maybe note, just Sam, in case this wasn't part of your response, that I think that we have a requirement in the code to have performance audits and financial audits, but the city will not be doing the performance audit every time. I mean, and they have said that to us explicitly. The auditor's office is not going to be doing so. When we go out for a performance audit in the future, we won't be under these same restrictions. And I would fully anticipate that we would absolutely bring that into a public space and to the full committee, and sort of for a more open dialogue. These restrictions are really a function of the fact that the city auditor's office is the one who is doing it. This just chose to do it this time.
So can I guess clarifying that, so the restrictions on us reviewing it are restrictions placed by the auditor, or it's a restriction?
It's a city statute around what is defined as conditionally exempt from public records. And essentially it's this trip that happens that the argument is, once you let the entire committee view it, it's no longer conditionally exempt from public records laws because the body has viewed it. And so it's a private document until it's finalized and then published. And so and that's the statute that there's, and I'm happy to follow up, but it's the statute that governs the ability for them to produce audits in a way that they get to do their investigations, all of that stuff, and then publish them when they're done.
So just to understand, I understand this correctly. So city council, all the commissioners can't review it at the same time together. Only one can, to keep it still that private document until it officially goes public. That's the legal interpretation. And that is just to understand, so that limitate the sorry to belabor the point here. So the same application for commissioners will be placed for us as another layer of a body. So we're sort of similar. We're getting the same standard. So I understand anyway, I might be belaboring the point. Sorry. I think I'm just digressing here. So I think I understand the feedback here on the auditors restrictions.
Yeah. And maybe we can follow up with some additional detail before Sam and I start lawyering, which is outside our wheelhouse for sure. But that's sort of what our understanding of what the rules are. Shanice?
I actually really appreciate this conversation right before I hopped in, because there's this that I was chewing on. But yeah, I know that we have our own, expectations as a committee to have regular audits. And I think this particular example, if I'm not mistaken, is something, to kind of support, right? Reflecting on our goals for the PCEF program and city climate goals, but not necessarily something that we initiated. And I think it's also, telling, right, that our interaction with the process is minimal, right? And there may not be representation that's could be adjusted to be more accurate, right? As we kind of sit with whatever's going to be in it. So I think from a political sense, I am hearing what staff are asking us right now, and that having a response, I feel is essential. Having one before the audit comes out, and I have full trust in our co-chairs, and I am hearing what the dynamics are, and I understand, these limitations. I'm also curious on what staff think on which pathway would be the path of most success and alignment to, keeping the focus truly on the momentum and goals and progress of this program. And just wanting to name some of these things that there could very well be something controversial in it. I'm keeping a space in my person to be ready for that. And I think a part of this exercise here, as us sitting on this body, is to kind of protect and advocate in the best interest of the PCEF program, as we assess, critique, and kind of navigate through this pilot stage. So just naming all of those things, and curious about what staff actually would prefer, given y'all being in the sauce in a different way, and giving us this thing to grapple with, which I'm naming again. I'm hearing what you're asking and seeing the dynamic. So I think path 3 is personally makes sense, given we don't really know what's going to happen, and there may or may not be next steps anyway. But there's that.
I appreciate that, Shanice. Maybe before Sam, we offer what staff might prefer. Amanda, I saw your hand go up and then down, and I just wanted to ask if you offer the opportunity.
Well, I wanted to ask some questions, and then Shanice asked the questions that I was wondering. So just really want to echo everything that was said, and really appreciate the questions that were asked, because there was a lot of questions I had when this was presented. And also I do, fully trust our co-chairs to, come up with a wonderful response, and just really want us to be careful moving forward with this. And it is a pretty scary process, considering that this is our first first like audit, I guess, as a body here, and I'm wondering like how can we look at this with our guiding principles in mind and kind of move forward in that way. But yeah, to echo Shanice's points, like I'm wondering like what does the staff think on this, on these three paths?
Hey, Michael. Thanks, Amanda. Michael, and then Sam. Nope, you're muted.
Hey, Amanda and Shanice. I am not staff, but I have seen 2 of the drafts now of the audit, and I've sat in on the meetings for the auditor along with Maria. And there are items in there that we are going to definitely want to address. For me personally, it hasn't been the most pleasant experience. It hasn't left me feeling warm and fuzzy and trustful. But I think that it is in our best interest to respond when the audit becomes public, to have a response going out with it. Absolutely. I appreciate your trust as co-chair. I'll speak for Maria too, that we appreciate your trust as co-chairs. I would like to have another voice from the committee to help us draft a response if we decide to go with path 1 or path 3. At least one more, if not 2. Just because there are some responses that we are going to want to make. And I think we're going to want to make those responses quite forcefully and emphatically.
Faith, I saw your hand go up and there. Oh, Amanda. That hand's going up and down all over the place. Amanda, was that a hand up you're volunteering?
Yeah, I wanted to ask in response to what Michael just said. So when he's asking for an additional committee member to join them, does that additional committee member get to see the audit? Oh, okay.
That was a yes for those listening in.
Yeah, okay. That wasn't 100% clear on the timing of all this. And then the other clarifying point is when, like what window of time are you talking about?
So the audit conference will happen next Tuesday. That's going to be that's going to be the final chance to get final sort of reflections on, did they get some of the pieces just correct? There's some of the pieces where it's like, here's the final, did we get it correct? They'll go back, and I suspect within a week or 2, give us the final and say, now your 2-week clock starts now. So it could begin as soon as the end of next week. What I suspect is probably sometime the following week of the 28th or the week of that first week in July. The first full week in July is when we get, and then the 2-week clock would begin. And then the 2-week clock to draft the response would begin. And the response is, studied up, or not the response, but it's put together and then published.
So I know that we are at 8:30. I did hear from Michael. I think it feels like most folks feel have expressed a lot of confidence in Michael and Maria. I'll say that. And I think, and I have also heard a couple of times a request from Michael for at least one other committee member to sort of be brought into the loop so that they can read the audit and be a thought partner in the response. And so I just want to ask if we can, if there's more conversation needed, if there is, it's likely we would want to try and schedule a special meeting, a special committee meeting to wrap it up. Or if it feels like we're at a place where we could make a decision about which path and also maybe get some volunteers to join Michael and Maria in thinking about a response. And I see Ranfis's hand and Megan's hand.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, given Michael's feedback and given that he's been closest to this and his comments, I feel comfortable moving forward with path 3 and identifying, 2 committee members who could participate in this. So I'm happy to make a motion or just wait after I hear Megan's comments or other comments.
Yeah, let's let Megan have her comments first. Sorry, my earbuds just died, which is also how we know that the meeting is almost over. Megan?
I concur with Ranfis, but I also wasn't sure if you were looking for people to identify right now, and I have some time constraints coming up, but so I wasn't sure. But anyway, I think we should probably decide what path first, and then maybe in another way come up with who is doing that.
Yeah. I think, Sam, unless you feel that who is coming on should be a decision of the committee as well.
I mean, it's really up to, I think it's really up to y'all if y'all feel that's a decision. I mean, what would be helpful, I guess, amongst the group now is for folks to express, like, Megan, what I'm hearing from you is the time constraints are real. I don't have a sense exactly that when that 2-week clock begins. I have just a general sense, and part of that is because there's been unknowns throughout the process. And so I think what would be helpful in a sense is I actually would love to know if they're the folks that are interested now, and then we can, and if there are 3 people interested, and then we can figure out what the dates work, and maybe like these 2 folks are interested first, and if this person can't make it, then we'll go to the next. I don't know. I only say that because I get the sense that I think our next committee meeting is July 7th.
Yeah.
7th, and I think that's too far out. Unless you just think there may be only 1 or 2 people interested, in which case we can send them out by email and be like, hey, come on in. But I guess I want to know, it may be that, so I don't know if there's multiple people interested. Maybe that's just an easy place to check first.
Yeah, I guess maybe I guess for sake of time, maybe figuring out those 2 individuals, we could do it maybe offline or maybe as we close down, but I'd like to just at least move forward and make the motion to approve path 3, move forward with path 1 while still drafting an additional response after the audit is released. I guess anyone willing to second the motion?
Like Faith?
Yeah, I'll second it. That's great.
So then we will go around and folks I'll call on you and you can indicate if you agree or if you, with the decision, if you want to stand by, which was sort of no opinion, but goes in the agree column, or if you would vote or if you oppose the decision. So we'll start with Megan.
Agree.
Robin?
Agree.
Jeffrey?
Agree.
Amanda?
Agree.
Michael?
Agree.
Who am I missing? Shanice?
Agree.
Thanks, Shanice. And Ranfis made the motion and Faith seconded it, so they agree as well. All right. We'll follow up with an email to sort of figure out which committee members are going to join Michael and Maria in reviewing the audit and developing a response. And are there any closing comments that committee members want to make before we let you go?
Thank you. It's another
Thank you
audience.
for hanging here.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Have a good night, everyone.
Have a great
Good night.
weekend.
Bye.
Yeah.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye, folks.